back to the theatre, ladies and gentlemen, for the last session of today. I hope you found today to be highly enlightening and very educational, and certainly I hope you found something that you're going to take back to your school and drive your school even further forward in how to use technology most effectively to engage and enhance student learning. The next speaker we have, and our last keynote of the day before we switch into the TFRL Awards, is one of Telstra's very own. With smart cities, smart homes, smart grids, and the IoT, or Internet of Things, all around us, one of our speakers today is going to be talking to us all about it. He's a specialist in this particular field. What he doesn't know, we probably don't need to know. But what we're probably curious is what it means to us as teachers and how we're going to lead towards smarter classrooms and possibly smarter schools. So, could you please join with me and welcome to the stage Laurence Daily, IoT.
Good afternoon, everybody. That's good, it's working. That's always a good start. Okay, well, welcome here to Telstra. Hopefully you've enjoyed our facilities. They're not too bad, they're not too shabby, I don't think. And it's 3:30 in the afternoon, so now you know what your students actually feel like after a full day of learning. So thanks for coming along today. Great to be able to share a little bit of this with you. My background is, as you can probably tell by the accent, I've been over in the UK for the last 20 years, working with the major telcos over there. My background is that I actually worked on a lot of the smart metering rollout in the UK, so Telstra actually sort of approached me, brought me across here, and I've been working a lot with the sort of, as we just explained there, the smart cities, smart grids, smart homes, etc. that we've got over here. It was really encouraging to hear Mark Scott earlier on there talking about how teaching's sort of evolving on there. My career, actually, I started as a combine harvesting instructor, believe it or not. I'm an engineering apprentice originally there, but I moved into combine harvesting. I spent 4 years travelling around the world on farms teaching about that. And here I am now in Australia talking about Internet of Things. That's been quite a slow progression. But I think as we move forward now with teaching, you'll actually see that jobs for the future are just going to be so different there. I joke when I get into taxis these days that when I speak to taxi drivers and just ask them really what they're going to do in 5 to 10 years' time. And they look at me blank. And it's true though, because like we have autonomous vehicles coming along. The world is changing. Those sort of manual type jobs there that we've sort of taken for granted that have always been there are changing, and they're not going to be there in the future. So it's very important that we do upskill students there to actually sort of be ready for that future and be more adaptable really. You know? So what I want to take you through there, hopefully this works. Yep. Basically I'm just going to give you a little bit of an insight into IoT as we see it from a telco company and what it means to us as a telco itself. And then what I'd like to try and do is sort of just bring it back to a little bit around the education side of things, where we're going with education, and what we can actually sort of do together there from that going forward. So looking at education, I put it up there as a sort of 5 pillars of education. It's more about sort of how do we engage with students around that. IoT is sort of quite a broad subject. It's not a product off the shelf that you take and you implement on there. It's more about finding out what are the issues, what are the drivers, what are the problems, and then going away and finding solutions around that. So in terms of education, what we're actually looking at in terms of education there is sort of, it's very easy to relate it to a school and a building. Yes, we can do smart parking, we can do sort of intelligent lighting and heating, etc. on there. But there's more to it with education there. It's about understanding their students. It's about taking them on that journey with it. So you really want to start engaging with the students at a very young age, which is pleasing to see you all here on that side of things. But that journey really starts from a very young age, progresses through, hopefully into university, and then stays with them even after that, then from there. The universities have a big challenge there in terms of attracting students actually into the universities themselves. So it's quite important for them to engage with those students prior to them even sort of thinking about university, so they're actually on that journey before they even get there. It's important to engage with them whilst they're there, and it's important to engage with them afterwards there, in their alumni side of things. But also, as teachers, it's also important for you to have the right tools as well. How do you gauge when you're actually sort of engaged with students? How do you actually sort of measure their actual interaction with the stuff that you're actually sort of doing from there. So we'll try and touch on a little bit of that. I've been around all day. There, say, if people actually want to talk to me, I'm around sort of for the rest of the day, etc. I'm happy to share any experiences and talk about things from there. So let's get on to a little bit of it. Why do we actually sort of look at IoT? What's the challenging drivers behind it now? I've just put up some figures up there. These are sort of like worldwide figures there. But basically, in the 1900s, we had about 10% of the people actually living in cities. And as you can see on there, recently we're now up to around about 50% of the population living in cities. And in another couple of years, we're going to be up to 75% of the people living in cities. That's a huge change from where we were. And most of the infrastructure that we've got now that we rely on in terms of utilities, transport, etc., has got to adapt to that. So we've got to make rapid changes. But what we've got to try and do is use the existing infrastructure. And unfortunately, some of that infrastructure is quite old. So the need for a lot of data and stuff like that is coming in rapidly into the marketplace. You can also see down the bottom there that 180,000 people move to cities every day. And that's quite staggering, really. And then sort of in the next sort of 20 years, some of the cities will actually start doubling in sizes. So that's going to put a huge strain on everything from the infrastructure down to education yourselves. The next thing I just wanted to touch on is what is IoT? The Internet of Things, the Internet of Everything. It's been called numerous things over the years. And unfortunately, it's one of those buzzwords that's been around for a long time, as has smart cities and smart homes. And it's an unfortunate sort of characteristic of our sort of industry that we actually talk about things a lot before they actually are ever introduced. And by the time they're actually introduced, everybody's fed up with hearing about it, so we change the name usually on there. There's a bit of a technical, the first two paragraphs on there are sort of more of a technical explanation of IoT in terms of connecting things and devices, etc. on there. The third paragraph down is the one that I actually like. IoT to me is about creating a sort of nervous system for the world. Basically, we can create, or we can sort of connect so many more devices now these days and take so much more data in and analyse that data now. And I'll come on to the network side of things, what we're doing in the networks in a minute. But basically, what we're essentially doing is we're giving the world a nervous system. There's sensors out there now that can measure sort of light. They can measure temperature. They can measure noise. Very similar to the human sort of nervous system. What we're doing is we're taking all that information, bringing it together, putting it onto a platform, and using analytics around it. That's IoT on there. You couple that with the sort of augmented reality and the other parts I've listed down the bottom there in terms of artificial intelligence. And then finally, we overlay that with quantum computing, which is coming along in a few years. And that's where, for me, it really gets scary in a few years' time as to where kids are actually going to be in education and what their jobs are going to be in the future. In terms of network and connectivity for us, I've just put a few stats up on there, and these are actually a little bit old, so don't take them as being gospel there, but we're already at the stage there, we've actually got more connected devices in the world than there are actually humans on the world itself. So I think it's running at around about 3.5 devices per person on the planet now as we stand. Going forward, the figures predicted by various statistics, I've heard various ones from 50 to 75 to 100 billion devices. But by 2020, it's anticipated there'll be around about 50 billion devices connected in the world on that. And you'll see in the bottom right-hand corner there, the early adopters of that sort of connectivity has been around a lot of the utilities, etc., who have had to start getting smarter around that. Their marketplace is changing. The utilities typically have an old infrastructure. It's aged, but they're having to change because everybody's demanding lower energy prices. But on the other side of it, you've actually got home generation beginning to kick in. So from an industry sector, they're quite challenged on both sides of the marketplace. So they've actually got to look at improving their efficiency and then diversifying from there. Some other figures from Gartner, just in terms of the actual spend in IoT there, going forward. But what you'll see, the interesting thing from this is where the big growth is. I mentioned 50 billion devices there by 2020. And you'll see from that graph there that the bulk of those devices are actually going to be in what we call the Internet of Things on there. It's about connectivity. We're connecting everything these days. Anything that can be connected will be connected, etc. And there are some barriers to that, and I'll come on to them in a minute there, but those barriers are about to change. So you'll see this exponential growth in connectivity over the next couple of years going forward. And just in terms of the opportunities that's providing to us, and again, these are from the IDC white paper, but it gives you an idea of some of the opportunities and how the marketplace is adopting them from there. So, unfortunately, that big word, smart cities, has got the biggest bubble on there. I'll come on to smart cities in a bit there, but they're a bit of a challenge there because it's not just simply about connectivity, it's about delivering benefits to the constituents and understanding how your environment operates before you just simply deploy things out there. But as I mentioned, the biggest adopters there are things like the energy and utilities marketplace and agriculture. Those are two very challenged industry sectors there that have sort of had to adopt, had to change and move forward from there. But even in education, you can see there's a £304 billion forecast there in terms of the opportunities. But these are the sort of conversations that children actually sort of need to be exposed to and understand where their careers are going to go. I know when I look back at my career, I had no idea what I was going to do. I certainly didn't think I was going to be a combine harvesting instructor. And then I certainly didn't think that I'd be in telecoms. And as I say, it's the skill sets that you actually need to sort of evolve into those positions from there. I'll just grab a quick drink, sorry about this. My apologies, I've just been struggling with the flu for the last couple of days, so slightly dry. Yeah, I'll try not to spread it. Okay, from a telco point of view, I touched on that we're actually looking to connect billions of devices now. The next slide will come on to some of the challenges on that, but just to show you what we're doing with the network itself. So traditionally, these sort of devices, everybody's wanted them to go faster, quicker, and more data. It's all about streaming movies, it's all about getting data fast. It's about video calls and everything else. So you'll see on that curve there, the traditional sort of network evolution. We've gone from 3G to 4G, you've probably heard 5G mentioned. These are all about bigger bandwidth and faster speeds at the end of the day. IoT is not necessarily about that. IoT is about lots of data, but in small packets on regular sizes there. So what we're actually launching is, we have launched already 2 networks down the bottom end there. So we've got our Cat1M network and what we call an NB-IoT network. And that's just narrowband IoT. Those networks aren't designed for high speed. And don't worry too much about the figures on the left-hand side, I should have taken that out actually. But you'll see from there that we're actually not talking about high-speed data. We're talking about being able to get small packets of data back on there. There's a couple of benefits that have come out of that network though, because, and so the next slide will actually show us that. But we've actually just turned that on in Sydney. It's been a very soft launch there, so you haven't seen any fanfares in the paper about narrowband IoT going on. But we've actually launched that and it's live now. We're working with a number of the industry sectors, and again, particularly the utilities, in terms of utilising those networks to actually sort of implement things like smart watering, smart metering and watering, etc. on there. Just in terms of what it means for devices, and this way you sort of, it'll start making a bit more sense to you now. The 3 barriers to sort of moving into sort of this area is the cost, the battery life and coverage. We've been able to connect stuff for years. We've been able to connect machines to machines for years, and you'll hear that M2M technology around. But you'll see that the barriers to it over the years have traditionally been that A, it's very expensive for the tariff and the cost of the network and for the module itself. The battery life on any device, typically a phone will last a day or 2 days on there, which is no good. And the coverage is also restricted to the 4G coverage itself. I'll tackle the coverage first of all. Coverage was quite an interesting one. When we actually turned on the narrowband network, it was simply a software update on our network. So we've switched on the narrowband, it's there now. That actually enhanced our network by around about a third from where it was existing on there. The reason for that is that from the same cell tower that we get a 4G coverage from, we can get up to 5 times as much coverage from the same cell tower there using the narrowband IoT network. And the benefits of that is that we can actually get deeper penetration into buildings, into basements, into the likes of where water meters are, etc. there. So, first of all, we've got enhanced coverage there. The second thing with it is, with this new technology there, the battery life itself is fully extended. So we're now looking at devices that are going to last in the field 10 to 15 years. Like that. So you start overcoming a lot of the challenges around that. And eventually the cost of it. We're now not talking about using the 4G network for this. We've got a separate network. So the cost of using this narrowband network is a lot lower. So we can deploy all these devices a lot quicker and a lot cheaper. So you, as I say, you'll start seeing these now that there'll be an exponential growth of all of this on there. At the bottom of it, you can actually sort of just see some of the sort of typical applications that we'd actually sort of use that for, in terms of sort of the high bandwidth sort of are the sort of connected car, video surveillance, which needs sort of quite broadband streaming. But you'll see a lot of the other stuff down the other end that I've mentioned already: parking meters, gas meters, water meters, etc. on there. So, just a quick one there, just to show you, so that just shows you the new coverage that Telstra's actually got now that we've actually rolled out the narrowband IoT network. It doesn't cover everywhere, so with any solution like this, we'd actually look at a blended solution on there. So, it may be that if you're on a farm in rural areas there where we haven't got coverage, that we'd actually look at using a local cell somewhere around there to actually sort of gather the information, and then we backhaul it out another way then from there. So we might use satellite or something like that. So we're not just restricted to where we actually have coverage. There are methods and ways that we can actually get all that data back out as well on that. So let's get on to something a bit more interesting for you. Smart schools. Now, I touched on before, there's different ways of looking at this. So if I talk about the smart school dashboard as we see it in terms of products and sort of the easy implementation side of things, I put together this little chart here, and it sort of just goes around the typical sort of things that we talk in a smart city around as well. So you can liken a school very much to a small city, in such that there's a campus on there. So we talk about the same sort of things around there, but it's looking at how we integrate these and the benefits that we can actually derive from them. So yes, we can do things like smart lighting, asset tracking, environmental monitoring, etc. on there. But what we're trying to do is bring these things together. So the ideal thing with a smart school is to start bringing in together things like smart lighting, temperature control, and that. Because ideally what we actually want to look at is what's the ideal sort of learning environment for children. Right? What's the ideal temperature, what's the ideal sort of air quality, what's the lighting like. So traditionally we'd have had those applications. Yes, you can do smart lighting, you can turn lighting up and down, yes you can measure the temperature, and yes you can measure the air quality. But how about if we then start feeding all of that into a platform that sort of says, hey, we're monitoring the classroom, this is the levels, etc. And we can automatically open windows, we can automatically, or the system can automatically open windows, automatically sort of dim the lights, increase the lights, etc. So you suddenly start getting to this point where you've actually got the optimum learning environment for children on that. Other things around there, as I say, we've touched on asset tracking. We're actually launching some products very shortly around asset tracking. So we're looking at those smaller tag type devices, etc. This gives you a lot of benefit in terms of tracking your equipment around a school itself. So things like projectors, TV screens, etc. that are moved around. These will be much easier for you to track around the actual system itself. One of the things we were actually looking to do today was I was actually going to set up a facial recognition system in here. And we were actually going to do like an attendance register for people coming into here. Unfortunately, we didn't get a chance to get it set up. But this is the sort of technology that we're looking at in terms of bringing into schools there, where at the moment you have to take the register, as I understand it, a couple of times a day, which can be quite time consuming on there. And it's typically a paper-based system there, or maybe on an iPad or something like that now. But wouldn't it be great if we could set up a couple of cameras there that sort of looked at the students as they entered into a classroom itself, could actually identify who was there and who wasn't there. You could have messages sent to teachers, administration, even to parents to identify or notify the fact that their student is or isn't there. We can also go slightly further than that as well these days, because with facial recognition we can actually do sort of a, well, best way of explaining it is sort of a distracted driver. We use it in vehicles, etc. at the moment. It's basically about facial recognition there, but we actually monitor drivers to watch their eye movements, etc. on there. So we can actually see when a driver's becoming sort of tired and distracted, if they're reaching for their phone or a radio and things like that. Now in that condition there, obviously we have a little seat in the cab that's set to vibrate, etc. to alert them to wake them back up. But those sort of things are monitoring. monitored in that industry there, but we could start looking at sort of bringing that sort of stuff over into the actual sort of education side of things, just to measure how students are actually engaged, what their sort of attendance level is in terms of sort of being aware of what's going on in the classroom itself on there. Other little bits and pieces around there, as I say, access control. You've got buildings, you've got sort of facilities there that are used during the day. But wouldn't it be great if you could give access to them at night to other people there? But without the need for somebody to be on site all the time there. So could you not use facial recognition or mobile phones, etc., to grant access into some of the sports facilities, tennis courts, etc., to turn on the lighting? You can combine that with CCTV there so that it's actually monitored there and sort of give people a safe feeling afterwards there. So these are the sort of typical things around the actual sort of building itself there that we can actually look at. But also it's about sort of how do we actually sort of engage with the students themselves. Now, unfortunately, we've moved a lot of the furniture out, but around the top corner up here, we have actually got some equipment that I was hoping to show you, but we can't today. Well, we've got some stuff around there like smart benches. These are like benches that we sort of deploy into cities, city centres and precincts on there. They've got solar panels on the top of them, they've got USB chargers in there, they've got Wi-Fi built into them, they've got temperature sensing, environmental sensing built into them. They're a little miniature sort of sensor of all sorts. So these are the sort of things that people can congregate around. Now again, we can sort of measure what people are doing there, and I'll come on to another area in a minute there around sort of monitoring people itself. But it's like, how do you engage with those students? What do you actually sort of, what can you learn about those students whilst they're in those positions? Are they using their phones? And it's not Big Brother's watching you there, but if you can monitor the activity and see where social gatherings happening, you can understand your students and sort of monitor that better. And you'll see what I mean about that shortly. Another example of where we are in IoT in education, and this is basically something, and I hate to mention it, it's something that we've done down in Victoria. But essentially what we did is through one of our partners, we've engaged with the Department of Education of Victoria. And we created a program at the time there for schools to actually sort of take their utility bills and sort of manually enter them into a system. What this enabled them to do then was basically monitor their energy usage and start educating and working with the students to understand energy usage within the schools themselves. Now, the Victorian government's taken this and they've sort of progressed it. I think it's around about 500 or 600 schools now have got it on board. And they've broadened the scope of the actual project itself now. So there's a link on there, and I say we can share this with you quite happily. Worthwhile going on there and having a look. So initially we started with just sort of manually putting bills in there. But they've actually taken it to sort of the next stage now. So they're not only just doing their power, they're doing water, they're doing waste, they're doing biodiversity, etc. on there. And there's a whole curriculum set up around this now in Victoria in terms of that. So you can log on, register for this, and your school can actually achieve different star ratings depending on how efficient you are. It's about educating those students around sort of what's happening in the environment now these days. So monitoring things and looking at things like solar panels and so forth. How do they get deployed in schools? What's the benefit of them? How much power do they generate? What's the feed-in? What's the tariff rates, etc. on there? So there's a whole curriculum around that. And then you can take it even a stage sort of further than that, into educating the students about how all of that industry works. How does the actual sort of utility market generate its electricity? What are the effects of it? Some of the stuff I touched on before in terms of the challenges for those marketplaces. But they have, obviously there's a sort of a little bit of competition goes on in there, so there are actually sort of how are we doing charts, and that's relating back into sort of stuff that we can relate to. So instead of having number of kilojoules or gallons of water, etc., which doesn't really mean a lot to students, etc., you can relate it back into baths, how many planes are flying, how many trucks, etc. So it's quite a useful sort of tool, and this is the sort of thing that we'd look to sort of engage with you on in terms of sort of taking those students on those journeys. I did mention a little while back there about good cities and smart cities there. The big challenge for us in terms of cities there is the fact that, as I say, it's very easy to deploy some smart bins, some smart lighting, and some smart parking, but does that make you smart? Probably not. And this is where I like to link it back into the education side of things. This is very much the same with the school, that we don't actually just deploy that sort of stuff just for the sake of deploying it. With smart cities, what we actually do is we work on actually trying to understand what's actually happening in the cities themselves. So we have this sort of overview of the city itself. And what we've actually done is subdivided it down into different sectors. And what we try to do is work with councils so they can actually understand each of those sectors. And in terms of, if you do things in those sectors, what's the impact going to be? Is it going to be beneficial? Is there going to be an outcome from it? Because there's no point in doing something just for the sake of doing it. If we look at it, there's 40 smart cities around the world. Well, there's more than 40 smart cities, but as I say, there's loads of smart cities out there, but what actually makes them smart on there? So unless you're actually sort of engaging with your community, putting sort of positive feedback into the community and delivering results back to them, there's not much point in sort of just deploying these bins, etc., for the sake of it. Again, I'll just snip through these and say these are the typical sort of things that we're talking again about with smart cities, but it's typical, it sort of relates back to the slide that I used earlier in terms of what we sort of look at employing in schools themselves, in terms of the buildings management itself on that. But really what I wanted to do is just get back down to what I just said there. The idea with it is to be more vision-led with it. It's about having a sort of a vision with human outcomes at the end of the day, and being human-centred. So people need to be relating back to it, as I say. It's funny actually, I was just talking to somebody outside there whose daughter goes to school, and she's a 5-year-old daughter, and she actually said that she actually puts RFID tags in her daughter's sandwiches so she knew that she'd thrown them in the bin, etc. Much to her daughter's disgust. Obviously it's not true, but as I say, it is quite impactful to see what happens there when people can actually relate to what's actually happening. If you said there was a smart bin there, she probably wouldn't have understood it there, but the fact that she puts her sandwiches and stuff in there and her mother knows about it does have that impact. The final bit I just wanted to touch on there is around understanding the community again. Not so much for the education, this is just another product that Telstra's got, which sort of helps us with the planning in terms of smart cities, and it's getting more and more defined around there now. Again, for years we've actually been able to tell where these things are, just by sort of triangulating them off the cell towers. So we've actually developed a product which is called Telstra Location Insights, which enables us to sort of anomalise that data, but present it to the likes of councils, etc., to enable them to start doing this planning around their community. So they need to understand how their communities work. How many people travel from the western suburbs into Parramatta? How many people park there for the day, then jump on a train, travel into the CBD? How long do they stay in the CBD? When they come back to Parramatta, do they spend time in a shopping mall, etc.? If you can understand all that data, if you can understand how the community operates and the environment operates there, you can then start planning around it. And schools are very much the same. As I say, you need to understand the students in terms of what they're doing. How are they spending their day? How are they engaging on it, etc., before you can actually sort of deliver those benefits to them. So as I say, IoT is sort of very broad, it's very big on there. It hasn't got a defined product. But as I say, there are huge opportunities in amongst all of that. The final thing I was just going to leave you with there is there's a gentleman called Jeremy Rifkin. I don't know whether any of you have come across him before. He's actually an economist there, and he actually does free advising to the European Parliament, European presidents, and more recently to China as well. But he did a talk the other day, and it was actually on SBS, it's on demand on SBS, it was about 2 weeks ago it was on there. So if you look it up, but it's on the internet as well. But he does a talk around the third industrial revolution. So the first industrial revolution they talked about was around communication, the second one's around machinery and industry. The final one, I say, that we're talking about now is the industrial revolution, but he talks about IoT and its impacts on the economy, how it actually sort of is going to affect things going forward. And again, a lot of it's detailed around the actual utilities, but very interesting conversation in terms of seeing where the future, in terms of industry and businesses, sort of go in a lot more detail on that. So it's worthwhile just having a quick look at that and say, take some of it with a pinch of salt because he's giving his own perspective on there, but quite an interesting talk on that side of it. Okay, thank you very much.
So ladies and gentlemen, I don't know about you, but I found that to be amazing in terms of some of the stats actually. The 3.5 devices per person, I hope my kids don't find that out. because I'm going to be struggling when I get home. And the smart TVs, smart washing machines, I love those. Smart picking and clothes up off the floor, I'd love those even better. But on a serious note as well, I think some of the information that probably is most applicable to us is the fact that Laurence gave us a number of issues about how we might use IoT devices in schools, and I think highlighting the fact that the opportunities that sit before us are quite immense within the educational space. They're limited only by our imagination and how we can apply them most effectively. And I think too, in this particular room and this particular conference, one of his most pertinent points, I think, would be the fact that effective use of technology is the most important thing. Not the tool itself, but the effective use. And whilst we are having these wonderful things delivered to us and the capability, it is how we use it at the end. And as educators, I think we are best positioned to try and make the best judgments, and hopefully today you've had some insight there. Can you please join me, giving Laurence a big round of applause. Thank you for the